Imagine being a quiet teenager, constantly tormented by bullies, when one day a gang of feared bikers rolls into your small town. The engines roar, the neighbors panic, and then they knock on your door. What happens next? It's not what anyone expects, but it's a moment that will change everything. Stick around, because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. Before we dive into this gripping story, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that will leave you thinking long after they're told. Wind Ridge, California was one of those places people often referred to as a hidden gem. It had everything you'd expect. A main street lined with quaint shops, the smell of salty ocean air drifting from the nearby coast, and a tight-knit community where everyone seemed to know each other's business. On the surface, it was a peaceful town. But like any small community, it had its cracks. And one of the biggest was what went unnoticed. Or worse, ignored. At Ridgeway High School, life wasn't as picturesque as the town itself. Beneath the shiny banners of school pride and the cheerful chatter in the hallways, some students didn't quite fit in. Among them was Luke Harper, a quiet 15-year-old boy with a gift for art. Luke's drawings were more than just sketches. They were windows into a world he created to escape the one around him. In his world, the heroes always won, and the bad guys got what they deserved. Luke's reality, however, was far less forgiving. His days at school were a gauntlet of torment. Jason Reed, the captain of the football team, seemed to have made it his personal mission to ensure Luke never had a moment of peace. Jason wasn't alone, either. He had a group of followers. Other kids who laughed at his cruel jokes and joined in whenever he decided Luke was today's target. "Hey, Hopper," Jason called out one morning, his voice booming across the hallway. Luke's heart sank as he instinctively clutched his sketchbook tighter. It was his most prized possession, and Jason knew it. Before Luke could respond, Jason grabbed it out of his hands. "Let's see what you're hiding in here," Jason sneered, flipping through the pages. Luke froze, his voice caught in his throat. The other students gathered around, some curious, others simply entertained. Jason stopped on a detailed drawing of a superhero standing tall against a shadowy figure. "This? You? What, you think you're some kind of hero?" Jason mocked, holding the drawing up for everyone to see. The crowd erupted into laughter. Luke's face burned with humiliation as Jason tore the page from the book and crumpled it into a ball. "There, fixed it for you," Jason said, tossing the wad of paper over his shoulder before walking off with his entourage. At home, Luke's mom, Sarah, did her best to support him. She worked long hours, juggling 2 jobs to keep their modest home running. She noticed the changes in Luke, how he barely talked, how his once bright eyes now seemed dulled by the weight of his days. She tried to talk to him, but Luke always brushed it off with a forced smile. He didn't want to burden her more than she already was. One evening, Sarah found Luke sitting at the dining table, staring at his sketchbook. "Luke," she said gently, sitting down beside him, "are you okay?" "Yeah," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. She reached out, placing a hand on his. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Luke nodded, but deep down he didn't believe it. What could she do? She was already doing so much just to keep them afloat. He didn't want to add to her struggles. Things hit rock bottom the day Jason decided to take things further. During lunch, he snuck up behind Luke and grabbed his bag. Before Luke could react, Jason dumped the contents onto the cafeteria floor. His sketches scattered everywhere, and Jason grabbed another drawing, this one of a fantastical cityscape. "Look at this," Jason announced, holding the paper up. "This is what Harper does while the rest of us are out living real lives. No wonder he's such a loser." Someone in the crowd pulled out their phone and started recording. Luke scrambled to pick up his drawings, his hands shaking as he tried to gather them before Jason could destroy more. The laughter and taunts echoed in his ears. By the end of the day, the video was online, shared in group chats and posted on social media. Luke became the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. That night, Luke sat in his room, staring at the blank pages of his sketchbook. He wanted to draw, to escape, but his hands wouldn't move. He felt trapped, powerless, and utterly alone. Wind Ridge, for all its beauty, had failed him. The teachers turned a blind eye, the students joined in or stayed silent, and even the townspeople who saw the video seemed more amused than outraged. But Luke didn't know that things were about to change. Help was coming from the most unexpected place. A help that would storm into Windridge with roaring engines and unshakable resolve. Luke just didn't know it yet. Windridge woke up to an unusual sight one crisp morning. The sound came first. A deep, rumbling growl that echoed through the hills, growing louder and more insistent with every passing second. It wasn't the usual hum of cars or the occasional chatter from early risers. No, this was something different, something that made people pause mid-conversation and turn their heads. Then they appeared. One after another, sleek motorcycles rolled into the heart of the town, their riders clad in leather jackets adorned with an emblem, a coiled serpent wrapped around a gleaming steel blade. The Iron Serpents had arrived. At the front of the pack was Jack Steele Morrison, a man who seemed to command attention without saying a word. He had the kind of presence that made people step back instinctively. His sharp blue eyes scanned the town as they rode through Main Street, the engines of the bikes creating a symphony of power that sent a shiver down the spines of anyone watching. Behind Jack rode Lucas Bear Thompson, a massive man with arms as thick as tree trunks, and Maria Viper Sanchez, whose intense gaze seemed to pierce through anyone who dared look her way. The rest of the gang followed, each member looking as if they had stepped out of a gritty action movie. To the townspeople, they were more than intimidating, they were terrifying. The bikers didn't stop to talk. They didn't shout or make demands. They simply rode through, their formation tight and purposeful, before parking their motorcycles at a diner on the edge of town. It was a deliberate move, one that sent an unspoken message. We're here. Windridge was no stranger to gossip, but that morning the town's usual chatter turned into a full-blown frenzy. At the coffee shop, two elderly women whispered over their cups, their voices low but urgent. "Do you see them? All those motorcycles? Must have been at least 20 of them," one said, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred her coffee. "And that leader, Jack, was it? He looks like trouble, they all do," the other replied, glancing toward the window as if expecting the bikers to storm in. Across the street, business owners were locking their doors earlier than usual. The hardware store owner, Mr. Nelson, pulled down the metal shutters on his windows and muttered to his assistant, "Last thing we need is a gang tearing through this place." At Ridgeway High, the faculty had their own crisis meeting. The principal, Mrs. Donovan, paced nervously in her office while the vice principal sat in silence, staring at the report in his hands. The document wasn't about the bikers directly. It was about the video of Luke Harper that had gone viral. The connection wasn't clear, but the timing of the bikers' arrival had everyone on edge. They had woven the video together from images from the air. "Heap diblets. What do you think they want?" Mrs. Donovan finally asked, breaking the silence. The vice principal shrugged. "I don't know, but with what's happening at the school, we need to be cautious. Tighten security. We can't risk any incidents." Meanwhile, Police Chief Frank Weston had his hands at the station. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since the bikers rolled in. Residents called in with every theory imaginable. Some say Iron Serpents were there to rob the town blind. Others believed they were looking for someone specific. "They've got to be here for revenge," one caller insisted. "Mark my words, Chief, someone in this town crossed them." Frank sighed as he hung up the phone. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but even he couldn't deny the weight of the situation. He knew who the Iron Serpents were, a notorious biker gang with a reputation that stretched across states. They weren't known for mindless violence, but they weren't exactly saints either. He pulled up the footage from the town's security cameras, watching as the bikers rode through Main Street. His eyes narrowed as he focused on Jack Morrison. The man's calm, calculating demeanor unsettled him. Frank leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. By mid-afternoon, the town was buzzing with speculation. At the local grocery store, a group of teenagers swapped theories while pretending to browse the snack aisle. "My cousin in San Diego says the Iron Serpents once burned down a whole warehouse when someone messed with them," one boy said, his voice hushed. "That's nothing," another chimed in. "I heard they've got connections with the mob. Maybe they're here to collect on some debt." Even Luke Harper couldn't escape the whispers. At school, he overheard classmates speculating about the gang. Some of them joked that the bikers were probably there for him after seeing his viral video. Others suggested they might have come to recruit Jason Reed, a theory that made Jason puff up his chest with false bravado. But Luke wasn't laughing. He couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival was somehow connected to him, though he didn't know why. As he sat alone in the cafeteria, his mind raced with possibilities. Back at the diner, the Iron Serpents remained an enigma. They ordered meals, kept to themselves, and spoke in low tones that didn't carry beyond their table. To the onlookers, their silence was almost more unsettling than if they had been loud or aggressive. It left room for the imagination to run wild. And that's exactly what the people of Windridge were doing. The tension in the town was palpable, growing with each passing hour. And though no one could say for sure what the bikers were after, one thing was clear. Windridge would never be the same after this. Little did they know, the real story was just beginning. Luke's day had been worse than usual. The whispers, the stares, and the snickers followed him through every hallway at Ridgeway High. The video Jason posted had spread faster than wildfire, and the humiliation felt endless. All Luke wanted was to get home, retreat to his room and lose himself in his sketches. As he pedaled his rusty bike down the familiar route home, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with passing cars. The cool afternoon breeze did little to calm his nerves. But then he heard it. The unmistakable growl of engines. The sound grew louder, and soon it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. Luke glanced over his shoulder and froze. There they were, the Iron Serpents. The entire gang was parked at a gas station up ahead. Luke's heart raced as he took in the scene. Their motorcycles gleamed under the sunlight, each one unique but all bearing the same emblem of a coiled serpent. The riders stood together, their leather jackets and confident stances making them look like something out of an action movie. Luke debated turning around, but the only other route home was much longer, and he wasn't sure he could outrun his rising panic. Gritting his teeth, he decided to ride past them as quickly and quietly as possible. Maybe they wouldn't notice him. He was wrong. As he neared the station, one of the bikers looked up. It was Lucas Bear Thompson, the towering man whose nickname suited him perfectly. Bear locked eyes with Luke and, to his surprise, gave him a friendly wave. Luke's blood ran cold. He gripped his handlebars tighter and pedaled faster, his heart pounding in his chest. Bear chuckled and turned back to his companions, muttering something Luke couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it left the other bikers glancing in his direction, though none of them made a move to approach him. Luke didn't look back until he was well past the gas station. Even then, the sight of those bikes lined up and those intimidating figures etched itself into his mind. As he turned onto his street, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Iron Serpents hadn't been idle at the station. They seemed like they were waiting for something. Or someone. By the time Luke reached home, he was on edge. He parked his bike in the garage and hurried inside, locking the door behind him. Sarah was in the kitchen, still in her work uniform, preparing dinner. "You're home early," she said with a tired smile. "How was school?" "It was fine," Luke mumbled, heading straight for his room. He didn't want to worry her, but his mind was racing. Why had the biker waved at him? Was it just a coincidence? Or did they know who he was? Before he could dwell on it further, the distant roar of engines shattered the quiet evening. Luke's heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable. It was them. He rushed to his bedroom window and peeked outside. Sure enough, the Iron Serpents were rolling down the street. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some stepping onto their porches, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. The bikers slowed as they approached Luke's house, their formation precise and deliberate. One by one, they parked their motorcycles along the curb. Sarah appeared in the doorway of Luke's room, her face pale. "Luke, what's going on? Who are they?" "I don't know," Luke whispered, his voice barely audible. There was a knock at the front door, a single, firm knock that echoed through the house. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Luke before heading to the door. Luke followed, his stomach twisting in knots. When Sarah opened the door, she was met with the imposing figure of Jack Steele Morrison. He stood tall, his expression unreadable but not overtly threatening. Behind him, the rest of the Iron Serpents waited silently, their presence alone enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. "Mrs. Harper?" Jack asked, his voice calm and steady. Sarah swallowed hard. "Yes. Can I help you?" "We're here for Luke," Jack said simply, his gaze shifting past her to the boy standing frozen in the hallway. The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. She stepped in front of Luke, her voice firm. "What do you want with my son?" "We're not here to hurt him," Jack assured her, raising a hand as if to calm her. "But we need to talk to him. It's important." The neighbors were gathering now, murmuring among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. The tension was palpable, and Sarah was torn between slamming the door and demanding answers or finding out what these bikers wanted before things escalated. Luke, despite his fear, stepped forward. His voice trembled, but he managed to speak. "Why? Why me? What do you want?" Jack looked directly at Luke, his piercing gaze meeting the boys. "You've been through enough, kid. We're here to help." The words didn't make sense. Not yet. But something in Jack's tone made Luke pause. There was no malice, no threat, just an odd sense of certainty. Sarah looked at Luke, her eyes pleading with him not to do anything reckless. But Luke took a deep breath and stepped out onto the porch, past his mother. The neighbors fell silent, the bikers didn't move, and Jack nodded approvingly. "That's brave," Jack said. "We'll explain everything, but first you need to trust us." Jack exchanged a glance with Bear before continuing. "Lucas here grew up in this town. He saw a post online about what's been happening to you. That video—" Jack's voice tightened slightly, but he kept his tone steady. "We've been in your shoes, kid. We've all been there. And we're not the kind of people who can sit back and do nothing." Luke's eyes darted to Bear, who gave him a small nod. "It's true," Bear said, his voice deep but gentle. "I know what it's like to be cornered, humiliated, and feel like no one's got your back. That's why we do what we do. The Iron Serpents aren't just some gang. We're a family, and we look out for people who need it." Jack stepped in again, his tone more serious. "We've made it our mission to stand up for kids like you, bullied, ignored, and left to fend for themselves. We don't tolerate that kind of cruelty, not in our world." Luke blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. These bikers, who looked like they could tear through walls, were here because they wanted to help him? It didn't make sense. Sarah crossed her arms, still wary. "And what do you expect to do? Scare a bunch of teenagers? Intimidate them?" Jack shook his head. "That's not how we work. We're here to give Luke the strength he already has but might not know how to use yet. We're not here to fight his battles. We're here to show him he's not alone." There was a long pause. Luke's mind raced as he replayed Jack's words. Could he trust them? Did they really care about what he was going through, or was there another motive? He wasn't sure what to believe. Luke finally spoke, his voice quieter this time. "Why me? I'm nobody." Jack leaned back, his expression softening. "That's what they want you to believe. That's what bullies do. They tear you down until you think there's nothing left of you. But I've seen it before. You've got something they don't have, Luke, and that's why they come after you." Luke looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "I don't know if I can face them. They've already made my life miserable. What if this just makes it worse?" Bear stepped forward, his massive frame somehow radiating reassurance. "I felt the same way when I was your age," he said. "I used to hide, hoping the world would just forget about me. But then I met Jack, and he helped me see that hiding wasn't the answer. Facing them doesn't mean fighting them. It means showing them they can't break you." Jack nodded. "We're not saying it'll be easy. But tomorrow morning, we want you to ride with us to school. Not to scare anyone, but to make a statement. You're not alone. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine too. The choice is yours." The room fell silent. Luke glanced at his mom, who looked torn between fear and hope. He could feel her worry, but he also saw the way her eyes softened as she looked at him. She wanted him to be strong, to believe in himself, but she didn't want him to get hurt. Finally, Luke took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Jack smiled faintly, a rare, genuine expression. That's all we needed to hear. Bear clapped Luke on the shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. "You've got guts, kid. Tomorrow's going to be different. You'll see." As the bikers made their way to the door, Luke felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite explain. Fear, doubt, and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. When Jack turned back before leaving, he gave Luke one last piece of advice. "Remember, this isn't about them, it's about you. You're stronger than you think, Luke, and tomorrow you'll prove it." The door closed behind them, leaving Luke and Sarah alone in the quiet house. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Are you sure about this?" Luke nodded, his gaze steady. "I have to be." Outside, the Iron Serpents mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life. They rode off into the night, leaving behind a town full of questions and a boy who was about to change everything. The morning air was crisp, and Luke sat nervously on the back of Jack's motorcycle as the iron serpents rolled down the streets of Windridge. The rumble of the engines was almost deafening, a sound that seemed to carry a message. We are here, and we're not afraid. Luke clutched the edges of his helmet, his palms sweating as he looked at the line of motorcycles stretching in front of him. As they approached Ridgeway High, the usual morning buzz of the schoolyard came to a grinding halt. Conversations dropped mid-sentence and students turned toward the source of the commotion. The iron serpents pulled into the parking lot like a wave crashing onto the shore, their bikes glinting under the morning sun. Luke spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Students who had laughed at him, ignored him, or stood by as he was tormented. Their expressions were now a mix of shock, curiosity, and, in some cases, fear. Jason Reed, standing by his usual group near the school entrance, tried to act nonchalant, but his rigid posture betrayed him. He crossed his arms and whispered something to his friends, but his eyes never left the bikers. Jack cut the engine, the sound fading into an eerie silence. One by one, the other bikers followed suit. Luke hesitated as Jack glanced back at him. "You ready, kid?" Luke nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. His legs felt like jelly as he swung them over the side of the bike and stood up. The moment his feet hit the ground, he felt every eye on him. It was the same feeling he'd had in the cafeteria when Jason dumped his bag, but this time it was different. He wasn't alone. Jack stepped off his bike, standing tall as he scanned the crowd. "Stay close," he said to Luke, his voice calm but commanding. The bikers formed a loose line behind them as they walked toward the school entrance. The sea of students parted instinctively, giving them a clear path. Whispers rippled through the crowd, questions and speculation flying like wildfire. "What's that? Is this about Luke? Is he part of their gang now?" Jack stopped a few feet away from Jason, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You must be Jason," he said, his tone conversational but firm. "We've heard a lot about you." Jason scoffed, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "Yeah? And who the hell are you?" Jack ignored the question, his focus unwavering. "You like to pick on people who don't fight back, is that it? Makes you feel big?" Jason smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Jack said, stepping closer. "See? Bullies like you always think you've got the upper hand. But the truth is, you're just hiding behind a crowd. Take them away, and what are you left with? Nothing." The crowd of students grew silent. Jason's friends shuffled uncomfortably, inching away as if to avoid being part of the spotlight. One of them muttered, "This isn't worth it," and slipped away, leaving Jason standing alone. "You don't know anything about me," Jason said, his voice rising with forced confidence. "I didn't do anything to him." Jack raised an eyebrow and looked over his shoulder. "You hear that, Luke? Sounds like he thinks this is all in your head." Luke hesitated, then took a step forward. "You humiliated me, Jason," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. "You stole my stuff, tore up my drawings, and made sure everyone saw me as a joke, and now you're pretending like it didn't happen?" Jason opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another voice cut through the tension. "He's right." It was a girl standing near the back of the crowd, one of Jason's classmates. "We all saw it. You didn't just bully him, you made it worse for anyone who tried to help." More voices joined in, one by one. "Yeah, I saw you trip him in the hall. You were the one who shared that video, weren't you? I always thought it was messed up, but no one wanted to say anything." Jason's face turned red as the crowd turned against him. The confidence he had built over years of being the school's untouchable bully crumbled in an instant. He looked around for support, but even his closest friends avoided his gaze. Jack took a step back, letting the moment sink in. "See, Jason, the thing about power is, it only works if people believe in it. And right now, I don't think anyone's buying what you're selling." Jason's shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked genuinely small. The crowd murmured, their whispers now filled with a mixture of satisfaction and shame for having stayed silent for so long. Jack turned to Luke. "You've got what you came for. Ready to head inside?" Luke nodded, his heart racing but his chest lighter than it had been in months. As he walked toward the school doors flanked by Jack and the iron serpents, he felt a wave of something new. Pride. Behind them, Jason stood frozen, his reputation in tatters. and for the first time, Luke felt like he wasn't defined by the way others saw him. Today he had stood up not just for himself, but for every kid who had ever been made to feel small. And the best part? This was only the beginning. Sarah Harper had always prided herself on being a strong, independent mother. But when the Iron Serpents rolled into her life, she wasn't sure what to think. At first, their rugged appearance and rough demeanor unnerved her. How could these people, bikers who looked more at home in a gritty movie than her quiet town, possibly be the ones to help her son? Maria Viper Sanchez noticed Sarah's hesitation during their first meeting. Maria wasn't like the other bikers. Her sharp wit and calm presence set her apart. One evening, after Luke had gone to bed, Maria knocked on Sarah's door. She held a mug of tea and a warm smile, breaking through Sarah's defensive walls. "You've got questions. Ask," Maria said, settling into one of the kitchen chairs. Sarah hesitated. "Why do you care so much about my son? What's in it for you?" Maria leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of the mug. "I see a lot of myself in Luke. Quiet, creative, trying to survive in a world that doesn't make it easy. I didn't have anyone back then. No one to tell me it was okay to fight back." Her voice softened as she shared her story. Maria had grown up in a rough neighborhood, constantly overshadowed by a family that didn't believe in her. She turned to art as her escape, much like Luke. But her surroundings eventually pulled her into trouble. It wasn't until she met Jack and the Iron Serpents that she found a sense of purpose and a family. Sarah listened intently, her initial skepticism giving way to understanding. For the first time, she saw beyond the leather jackets and roaring bikes. These people weren't just bikers, they were protectors, shaped by their own battles and determined to help others avoid the same pain. By the end of their conversation, Sarah felt a surge of strength she hadn't felt in years. Maria's words lit a fire in her, inspiring her to take a more active role in standing up for Luke. Together, they began working on ways to address bullying in the community, starting with Ridgeway High. Police Chief Frank Weston had been in Windridge long enough to know trouble when he saw it. Or so he thought. The arrival of the Iron Serpents had his instincts on high alert. He had heard the stories, seen the reports about biker gangs causing chaos in other towns. To him, they were a problem waiting to happen. But something didn't add up. The Serpents weren't wreaking havoc or making demands. Instead, they seemed focused on one thing: Luke Harper. Frank began digging deeper, trying to understand their motives. That's when he stumbled upon an unexpected connection. While reviewing his files, Frank found an old case involving his niece, Claire. Years ago, she had been in an abusive relationship, and no one had been able to get through to her. No one except Jack Morrison. Jack had stepped in when no one else would, helping Claire escape her situation and rebuild her life. She had spoken of him fondly, calling him her guardian in letter. The discovery left Frank conflicted. On one hand, he had a duty to protect the town and maintain order. On the other, he couldn't ignore the good Jack had done in the past, or the positive changes he was seeing in Luke since the bikers arrived. The dilemma weighed on him as he watched the events unfold, forcing him to reconsider what it truly meant to protect his community. As the dust settled at Ridgeway High, something unexpected happened. Jason Reed began to change. He wasn't the same arrogant bully who had terrorized Luke. Instead, he seemed quieter, more withdrawn. It wasn't long before the truth came out. One afternoon, Luke overheard Jason arguing with a teacher in the hallway. The usually confident Jason was on the verge of tears, his voice cracking as he defended himself. "You don't know what it's like at home," he said. "You don't know what I have to deal with." Luke didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words stuck with him. Later, he learned that Jason's father, a prominent figure in town, had been putting immense pressure on him to succeed, often resorting to verbal abuse. Jason's bullying wasn't about power. It was a way to deflect his own pain. This revelation didn't excuse Jason's actions, but it added layers to his character. Luke found himself grappling with unexpected empathy. When Jason approached him one day, it wasn't to taunt him, but to apologize. "I was wrong," Jason admitted, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry for everything I did." It was a small moment, but it marked the beginning of a shift in their dynamic. Jason's apology didn't erase the past, but it opened the door for growth and understanding. As the Iron Serpents continued to dig into the events leading up to Luke's bullying, they uncovered something sinister. The viral video that had humiliated Luke wasn't just the work of bored teenagers. It was part of a deliberate plan orchestrated by a local businessman, Victor Lang. Victor had been pressuring Sarah to sell her home for months, hoping to acquire the land for a new development project. When she refused, he decided to escalate his tactics. He paid a group of teens, including Jason's crew, to create and spread the video, framing Luke as the town's troublemaker. His goal was to isolate the Harpers and force them out. Jack and the Serpents pieced together the evidence, presenting it to Police Chief Weston. The proof was undeniable: bank transactions, leaked emails, and testimony from one of the teens who confessed under pressure. When Victor was confronted, he tried to deny everything, but the weight of the evidence was too much. The community rallied behind Sarah and Luke, exposing Victor's corruption and forcing him to abandon his plans. Luke and Sarah were no longer just victims, they were heroes in their own right. The town, once passive and indifferent, began taking steps to address the root causes of bullying and injustice, inspired by the Harpers' resilience. The weeks following the Iron Serpent's arrival in Windridge were nothing short of transformative. The once quiet town, known for turning a blind eye to its problems, began to change. It started small, parents talking to their children about kindness, teachers paying closer attention to the dynamics in their classrooms, and neighbors stepping up to look out for one another. But soon, those small actions grew into something bigger. At Ridgeway High, a group of students formed an anti-bullying club. They called it Harper's Heroes, inspired by Luke's courage to face his bullies with dignity and strength. The club's mission was simple: to create a safe space for anyone who felt isolated, bullied, or unheard. Meetings were held every week in the library, and attendance grew quickly as students shared their stories and supported one another. The school administration also took action. With Sarah Harper's help and the support of Maria Viper Sanchez, Ridgeway High launched a new initiative to address bullying. Workshops, counseling sessions, and anonymous reporting systems were implemented. For the first time, students felt like they had a voice, and that someone was listening. The transformation wasn't limited to the school. The entire town came together to celebrate Luke's resilience and creativity. The local art gallery hosted an exhibition featuring his sketches, which had always been his escape from the harshness of reality. The theme of the exhibition was strength in adversity, and Luke's drawings told a story of pain, courage. The event was packed. People from all over town came to see the artwork and show their support. Luke stood nervously in a corner, unsure how to handle the sudden attention, but Sarah stood by his side, beaming with pride. During the event, the mayor gave a heartfelt speech. "Tonight, we're not just celebrating the talent of a remarkable young man. We're celebrating the strength of a community that decided to stand together against cruelty. And none of this would have been possible without the Iron Serpents." The crowd erupted into applause as Jack, Maria, and the rest of the bikers were called to the front. For once, they didn't look intimidating, just proud. The mayor handed Jack a plaque that read, "In gratitude for protecting our own." Jack accepted it with a rare smile, his gaze briefly meeting Luke's in silent acknowledgement. The Luke who stood before the crowd that night was a far cry from the boy who had once avoided eye contact and kept his head down in the hallways. He had changed. His newfound confidence didn't come from the bikers alone, it came from knowing he had a voice and a community that supported him. Luke began using his experiences to help others. At Harper's Heroes meetings, he shared his story, encouraging others to stand up for themselves and for each other. He also started hosting small art workshops after school, teaching younger kids how to express their emotions through creativity. The sessions became so popular that even some of the teachers joined in, marveling at how Luke had turned his pain into something positive. His relationship with his mother also grew stronger. Sarah, inspired by Luke's bravery and Maria's mentorship, became an advocate for anti-bullying efforts in the town. The two often worked together, organizing events and speaking at community meetings. For the first time in years, their small family felt whole. Even Jason Reed, the former bully, became a part of the change. After the truth about his home life came to light, he sought counseling and began working on himself. He even apologized publicly at a school assembly, acknowledging the harm he had caused and pledging to do better. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. The day the Iron Serpents left Windridge was bittersweet. They had stayed long enough to see the seeds they planted take root, but it was time for them to move on. Their mission had always been to help those in need and then ride to the next town where their presence was needed. The entire community gathered at the town square to bid them farewell. Children waved homemade signs that read, "Thank you, Iron Serpents," and parents shook hands with the bikers expressing their gratitude. Sarah hugged Maria tightly, whispering a heartfelt "thank you" before stepping back, tears in her eyes. Jack approached Luke one last time. "You've got this, kid," he said, placing a firm hand on Luke's shoulder. "You don't need us anymore, but remember, you're part of our family now. If you ever need us, we're just a call away." Luke nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Thank you for everything." Jack gave a small nod and turned to his bike. The engines roared to life, filling the air with their familiar thunder. One by one, the serpents rode off, their formation as tight and purposeful as when they first arrived. Luke stood at the edge of the crowd, watching them disappear down the road. He pulled out his sketchbook, capturing the scene with quick, deliberate strokes. By the time the bikes were out of sight, he had finished a drawing of the iron serpents riding into the horizon, their legacy forever etched into the town's story. As he closed the book, Luke smiled. He had started the journey as a boy who felt invisible, but he was leaving it as someone who had found his voice, his strength, and his place in the world. And for the first time, he looked toward the future with hope. If this story got you entertained, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that will leave you thinking long after they're told.